My name's Anna Rawlings. Thanks for joining us for today's briefing, and welcome also to those who've joined us on the webcast this morning. Thank you for your interest in our final report into our market, in our market study into competition in residential building supplies. This report, as you know, has been a year in the making, and I want to acknowledge the engagement and support that we've had from within the building sector, including important perspectives shared throughout the study by Māori, ngā mihi nui. I also want to really state the obvious, which is that this market study and preparation of the final report is the product of many hands and many minds. Thanks to the team at the Commission, who have been led by our market study manager, in this case Oliver Meach. Our team have done a really great job of producing this final report and collating all the information through many interviews through our process and consultation phase so that we could get to this point with the final report today. And thanks also to those commissioners who have been involved in the preparation of this market study at different points in our process as well. And also, of course, to our now Chair of the Commerce Commission, Dr. John Small, who's going to lead you through most of the detail of our findings and recommendations today. We've arrived at conclusions and recommendations that we believe will improve competition and produce better long-term outcomes for New Zealand homeowners and for those involved in the industry. And this, of course, speaks to our general purpose across the Commission, which is to work to make New Zealanders better off. Before John gets into some detail, I'm going to provide you with a run-through of our process as a reminder, and also of our key findings. As you know, it was late last year that the government asked us to undertake this market study into the residential building supplies industry. And consistent with the terms of reference, we've considered factors that might be affecting competition for key building supplies used to build the major components of residential buildings. These major components include the foundations, the flooring, the roof, the walls, structural and non-structural interior and exterior, and also insulation. It doesn't include all products used in residential building. We've considered industry structure, we've looked at the nature of competition at different levels of the supply chain, but we've focused most strongly on the conditions for entry and expansion. And that's because these are the conditions that we consider are critical to promoting competition in the supply and acquisition of these key building supplies. We concentrated broadly on all factors affecting competition across that set of supplies, but we also undertook 3 more detailed case studies into plasterboard, structural timber and ready-mix concrete. This has assisted us to more closely consider the factors that might be affecting competition for all key building supplies through particular examples, and also to consider observations and findings or recommendations that could be applied across the sector more generally. The case studies haven't narrowed the scope of the market study. They're not mini market studies into these particular product areas. Our focus has remained, as the terms of reference requires us to, on competition dynamics at play in the broader industry. As I said when we presented our draft report in August, it will not be lost on many of you that the industry has been changing dramatically throughout the course of this market study. There are a number of unique and dynamic characteristics that we have taken into account, but we haven't closely examined factors relating to supply chain resilience or the short-term impacts that COVID-19 might have had on competition. We've also had regard to a range of government-led initiatives that have been underway or have commenced in the course of the study, and these include, importantly, the MB-led Building System Legislative Reform Program, which includes review of the building consent system, and that's still underway. The Plasterboard Task Force and government initiatives aimed at resolving the plasterboard shortage, and more recently a Critical Materials Task Force was established to extend that work. We've also been undertaking the study whilst the Productivity Commission commences an inquiry into the resilience of the New Zealand economy to supply chain disruptions which are relevant to this sector. And MB is also undertaking a Building for Climate Change program alongside the government's emissions reduction plan. All of these initiatives relate in some way to building and construction or to the supply of building supplies. They each have a different focus and a different objective to our study, which is obviously a focus on competition dynamics. But there are also many complementarities between each piece of this work and our work in the market study, particularly between our findings and recommendations and the work of the review of the building consent system. Many potential changes that arise from these initiatives might also improve competition and likewise contribute to the shared objectives for competition and for the building regulatory system of delivering safe and durable, healthy homes for all New Zealanders. Some of our recommendations are intended to be folded into some of these work programs in a way that is unrelated to them. The consultation and engagement process is described in quite some detail in the report, so I won't go through that. But the consultation process post-draft in particular has given us greater clarity on the issues at play in this market study and to refine our recommendations. From the outset, we looked the market study immensely. We've met with over 70 parties and issued a range of papers relating to our process, identifying preliminary issues, building regulatory system in operation. After publication of the draft report, we held a very patient conference which ran understanding Māori perspectives of the building regulatory system and industry, as had a hui that we held earlier in the process. This was also really helpful. A high degree of consensus and agreement came through these consultation processes following the draft report. But through that consultation, we were also able to increase the evidential basis upon which we rely to obtain greater confidence in the findings that we've refine our recommendations as well. For competing suppliers to expand their businesses within these relevant markets. The solution lies in improving competition in producing viable and sustainable competition over the long term in the sector. We've identified two main factors making it difficult for authorities to favour those products that are familiar to them over new or competing products. And the second factor is that quantity forcing rebates that are paid by established suppliers to merchants appear under some conditions to be reinforcing these regulatory factors impacting entry and expansion. And they make it difficult for new or competing products to access distribution channels or to increase sales as well through merchants. As in our previous studies, we've identified land covenants and exclusive leases, but also different kinds of land covenants and commercial agreements with similar merchants and that are likely to be impacting competition. And further areas where our compliance or enforcement will have a role in improving preventing competition from working well, and then he's going to cover the final recommendations that we've made in the study.
Privileged to be standing here next to previous chair who's led the Commission very ably through really significant change and development and growth and responsibilities in recent years. Anna has been obviously front and centre in all three of our market studies so far: fuel, supermarkets and now building products. And she's got a remarkable ability to take complex analysis and make it real for people. So I hope to be able to live up to some of that. So before I get on to our recommendations, I just want to have a few further comments on the challenges faced by sellers of new and innovative building products. And I'm going to use this little diagram to try and explain it. It's in the report in Chapter 4. Starting point is that it's a really complex regulatory system. At its heart, it's well designed and well motivated towards the provision of safe, healthy, durable homes for New Zealanders, but it's really complex to navigate. If you've got a building product that you want to get to market and get it approved as being code compliant, you've got to get through that dark blue layer on the diagram. And that shows the various compliance pathways that products need to pick one of those pathways through to compliance. The red outline, the red rhombus, are easy pathways. These are well developed, clear, smooth, previously established by MB and others to make compliance easy for particular products. There are relatively few of those pathways, and they're predominantly built for familiar products. Other methods that are not within that rhombus are slow, costly and uncertain. New entrant products often end up using these other methods. And as a result of using those other methods, not only is it more difficult to establish compliance, but BCAs, the Building Consent Authorities, are naturally somewhat more wary of them. And so therefore designers are also more wary, as are builders, who are less inclined to risk going down those paths. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle, where the net result of which is that the system ends up favouring familiar products and makes it more challenging to compete against them. Similar issues to these have been raised in MB's discussion paper on its consent review. So this is not new information, but it is important information to understand how the system works and how it makes life difficult for anybody trying to challenge the familiar products. Now to quantity forcing rebates briefly. I'll talk more about this when we get to our recommendations, but rebates of course are common business practice and they're often benign. However, in this sector, we've found heavy use by suppliers of what we call quantity forcing rebates. What these do is they cut the price on products that have already been sold by a merchant, if they sell enough product. So the merchant actually receives a significant cash payment, provided they hit their sales target. What we're concerned about here is that this rebate structure can hinder competition by making merchants reluctant to sell competing products if that puts their payment at risk. To some other findings that are also relevant. Firstly, it's pretty clear that some particular needs of Māori are not being well served by the regulatory system, and I'll talk more about that in the recommendations. Secondly, we found that at the merchant level, competition between merchants seems to be working reasonably well, particularly at the national level. There are some local areas where competition is limited, perhaps by population density. However, one issue we have found, as Anna's already mentioned, is the widespread use of land covenants, and we've got recommendations to cover that. Turning to vertical integration, which is a topic raised in the draft report as well. Vertical integration can provide a competitive advantage and potentially creates opportunity for certain conduct that can reduce competition. What we found in this industry is that it does not normally have a material adverse effect on competition for key building suppliers, either at the supplier level or at the merchant level. I'm happy to take questions later and discuss that further if you wish. Entry or expansion of new or innovative building supplies, including green building supplies, the sort of supplies that are likely to be required to help us cope with climate change. They are also likely to be impeded by the same factors affecting competition at the supplier level that we've just discussed and that affect all products. Finally, off-site manufacturing is a method that can add a range of benefits for the sector and has the potential to increase competition and productivity, but many off-site manufacturers currently face demand uncertainty and they lack scale. So those are the main findings. Turning now to recommendations. These recommendations are very similar to the ones on which we consulted in the draft report. As previously, we've grouped them into three interdependent groups designed to, first of all, enhance the regulatory system, secondly, support sound decision making, and thirdly, to address strategic business conduct. As a result of consultation following the draft report, we've closely reviewed all of the draft recommendations, and the result of that is two key changes from the draft. The first is that we've adjusted our recommendations relating to improved decision making and including introducing a new recommendation to support off-site manufacturing. And we've also adjusted the draft recommendation about the Maori perspective, and the new recommendation is much more actively designed to serve Maori interests. So I'll now talk through each of the 9 recommendations in a little more detail in the next few slides. So first of all, you're not going to be able to read that unfortunately, enhancing the regulatory system. So number 1 is to introduce competition as an objective to be promoted in the building regulatory system. Obviously, it's critical to ensure that the regulatory system continues to deliver quality and safe and durable housing, but competition can and should take a more prominent position in the system and in decision making underneath it. So we're recommending that competition be included as an additional express objective of the building regulatory system, which will contribute to and complement the existing focus on safety, health and durability. The second recommendation is to better serve Maori through the big building regulatory system. This includes delivering on obligations derived from the Treaty of Waitangi and addressing challenges faced by Maori within the sector. We think Maori should be more actively involved in the identification of further issues arising and on the design and implementation of any improvements, including opportunities for Maori leadership and for Mātauranga Maori to play a role. We think ensuring the consent system provides opportunities for Maori to build productive relationships with BCAs, and the flexibility to accommodate Maori building objectives is also crucial. And finally, supporting opportunities for building capability and capacity among Maori, including workforce development, identifying opportunities for more Maori leadership across the sector, and supporting Maori businesses to expand and compete at scale. Now we turn to other recommendations to enhance the regulatory system. So recommendation 3 is to create more clear compliance pathways for a broad range of key building supplies. That's referring to the red rhombus that we saw earlier. Consenting costs could be reduced and choice, innovation and competition increased by creating more compliance pathways for a broader range of key building supplies. There's a lot of detail underneath this recommendation. Essentially it means expanding the number of pathways that are deemed to be acceptable. Acceptable solutions and verification methods is their technical name. Expanding the range of product certification schemes that can issue product certificates that are deemed to be compliant with the code. and we suggest that that could include more recognition of international certification. Investigating and reducing further barriers to certification and appraisal, such as introducing streamlined processes for lower risk products. And finally, developing more guidance for key building suppliers, guidance that identifies the key provisions in the building code and explains how products can become compliant with those provisions. The fourth recommendation is to look for ways to remove impediments to product substitution and variations. This is referring to situations where a consent is granted and then for various reasons somebody wants to change a particular product for a different one. So we think there are ways to reduce specification by brand, which is quite common in the building system, particularly to allow other brands to be specified, so you could have two. And the other opportunity here is to increase flexibility in the multi-proof scheme. The multi-proof scheme is particularly suited to people who build the same design over and over. And so they get one consent for that design. And minor changes to that consent should be easier to make, in our view. Okay, so that's about the regulatory system. Turning now to supporting sound decision making, which is the second group. There are several recommendations here. One is to establish a national system to share information about building products and consenting. Currently, there is no national collection or system for storing product and consenting information, which is accessible to designers, builders, consent authorities and consumers. This makes it difficult to find information about new or innovative products and the basis on which they've been granted consent in particular places, whether anything went wrong when they were granted consent, and so it leads, the absence of that facility tends to fragment the decision making. So we think a national system to share product information could encourage, enable and incentivise greater consistency, more information about new and innovative products and methods. It could include links to the acceptable solutions, the red rhombus pathways, and it could include links to product certification registers. And it would also enable sharing. Next recommendation is an education and mentoring function to help coordinate and enhance BCA's consenting and product approval processes. So this is really like an arrangement that could be between BCAs, perhaps facilitated by MB, that would encourage more consistency. One of the big problems that we've heard in our consultation is about inconsistent decisions across BCAs and also within BCAs. And finally, in this section, we think it would be useful to develop an all-of-government strategy to coordinate and boost off-site manufacturing. This would include, or could include, leading by example for the government via procurement policies and initiatives across government that promote innovation through OSM, the use of mandates, targets, other incentives for home buyers and builders. Similar processes have been used internationally to good effect. Consumer education regarding the potential benefits and risks of OSM, particularly during the transition phase while these companies are building scale. And coordination of government and industry initiatives to deliver on a wider set of outcomes for markets, businesses and communities. So the third set now of recommendations is about strategic business conduct. And here we have we have two recommendations. The first one is really a recommendation to ourselves. It's to promote compliance with the Commerce Act, including by discouraging the use of quantity forcing supplier to merchant rebates that may harm competition. Some suppliers' use of quantity forcing structures in their agreements with merchants can potentially create impediments to the entry and expansion of other competing suppliers. We don't recommend legislative change in this area because to prohibit the use of a particular rebate structure seems unnecessary for several reasons. Rebates can provide benefits. Whether or not any particular rebate structure has the effect of lessening competition is really dependent on the specific circumstances of the market and of the rebate. And also, these are used widely across lots of different sectors. So a legislative change that was contemplated in this area would be unusual if that was just focused on building products. However, based on information collected in this study, we have opened an investigation and are continuing to consider Winston Wallboard's rebates. I should emphasise that this is an investigation designed to help us understand the facts better and to get a better understanding of compliance. Not a foregone conclusion, an investigation. Final recommendation is about the economy-wide use of land covenants, exclusive leases and contractual provisions with similar effect. As you know, this is the third market study where we've run into exactly these sorts of issues, and so we think it's time for a broader look across the economy to see how widespread these kinds of contractual mechanisms are and the extent to which they are hindering competition across the economy. So we've talked previously about restrictive covenants and exclusive leases that make it difficult for somebody to establish a premises in competition with someone else. Anna's also mentioned the other covenants that we've discovered here, which essentially give a merchant preferential rights to sell building supplies into a subdivision. Both of those types of arrangements are within the scope of this recommendation. Okay, so as Anna also mentioned, the consultation that we've had with the industry throughout this process has been very helpful. It's generally confirmed where we are heading here and given us much more confidence in the findings and recommendations that we're sharing today. Taken together, we believe these recommendations will make a real difference in delivering more choice and better quality, greater innovation for the benefit of New Zealand homeowners. Thank you very much. We'll take questions.
Just on the land covenants issue, I mean, you did talk about this in the supermarket regulatory impact statement as well. This is a reoccurring theme.
Yes.
Do you think it's time for the government, I mean, I'm not sure if you can ask the government to get you to look into things, but looking at that specific issue, this covenants issue across the economy, instead of looking at multiple different siloed sectors, to look at this one specific issue?
Absolutely. That was the thrust of Recommendation 9. That's exactly what we're recommending there, is that there be a broader look to see how widespread this is and what can be done about it. It's really as you know, we have a case currently in investigation into a particular land covenant in this sector. But doing these one at a time on an individualised basis is extremely resource intensive. So we totally agree. We think a broader look across the economy is the way to go here.
Fletcher Building has popped out a press release and says it's surprised by the Commission's conclusion that Winston Wallboards needs a third investigation into its rebates. Do you want a better explanation?
Has in opening an investigation, did it say?
We're surprised by the Commission's conclusion that it needs a third investigation to collect information about Winston Wallboards.
Well, I mean, we opened this investigation a week or so ago, and It's based on our own assessment of what we know currently about both the purpose of those rebates and their effects on competition in the market. In the market study, because it's inevitably quite broad, a very large number of products, we did not have the opportunity to understand that sufficiently well.
I guess what I'd just add to that you mentioned 3 investigations. So we did investigate, look into Winstone Wallboard's rebates early in 2014-15, I think it was, and concluded at that time that there were a number of other things going on in the sector, and those in fact are the things that we've looked at in this market study. At that time we didn't have the power to look more broadly at factors affecting competition, which we've now done. And a number of things have changed in the market since that time as well, we've discovered through the course of this study. So what we will do with this investigation is collect more information that goes beyond the scope of the study itself, because it will drill into this issue of rebates in a changed context and bearing in mind the recommendations that we've made addressing other contextual issues as well.
Also said they're withdrawing their rebates, and doesn't that make your investigation redundant now?
They're changing the structure of their rebates.
They said they're removing volume-based rebates.
That's fresh news today.
They're stealing your thunder a bit.
I mean, we did say in the draft report that we encouraged everybody who's using these rebates to have a good look at their effect, particularly given the changes coming up next year to Section 36. And we've been somewhat more explicit in this report that we think that you can achieve much of the same commercial objectives in terms of pricing to merchants without using this particular structure. So that sounds like good news.
How big are the rebates? Can you put a percentage on it or a dollar figure?
They vary dramatically across. They depend on the size of the merchant's business essentially, because the idea is to give the merchant an achievable target and to reward them in a way that's commensurate with how much business they do. So they vary.
A ballpark figure though?
No, I can't give a dollar figure. There's some information in here about the percentage sizes of them. I'll have to come back to you on that. Sorry, Tom.
About 17 months ago, the Commission said it had identified 80 restrictive covenants that were entered into by major grocery retailers that it could consider enforcement action against. As yet, no enforcement action has actually been commenced. I mean, given that, how long might we wait for any enforcement action to take as a result of the recommendations that you're announcing today into the building supplies industry? I mean, it seems people can have entire careers really after the Commission starts looking into issues and then move on. In some cases, as in Vodafone, companies have changed hands before any action is actually taken against them in relation to issues that you've covered. Is the Commission acting with sufficient urgency? Are we going to see more urgency from the Commission
So look, I mean, these investigations are, as I was explaining earlier, these investigations are detailed, complex, fact-specific, location-specific. We have been looking very closely, and we're continuing to look very closely at the supermarket ones, and we're also monitoring the supermarket's efforts to get rid of those covenants. However, the point I would make is that the reason, one of the big motivations for the recommendation here, which is to take an economy-wide look, is exactly the point that you're making, that these things, from our point of view, from an enforcement perspective and an investigation perspective, these things are difficult, time-consuming, and you have to have everything lined up.
I think why
are these investigations complicated? I mean, you know what's in the agreements. You know what these companies are doing. They're all documented, and you know why they're doing it. Why does it take so long? Why are they
it's the effect. It's the effect on competition that is really difficult to establish to the required legal standard, Tom. And that requires defining a market around a store, looking at what competitors are there now, looking at vacant land that could be used by an entrant, whether there is vacant land or not, how good, so there's every one of these, I can assure you, is its own detailed case.
I think I'd emphasise, Tom, if I could just as well, that the impact, and it also goes to the question relating to removal of rebates. I mean, that what we've seen in response to the grocery market study and our focus on covenants there, and this recommendation for a sector-wide review, in addition to our draft recommendation that people look at their rebating structure, is the power of compliance activity and of shining a light. And that is a tool that we have to employ at the same time as we employ investigation and enforcement tools within the Commission, because we don't bring enforcement action in relation to every matter that we identify or investigate. And these, as John said, do take some time, but we've got some underway in groceries, and we hope in coming weeks to have some greater clarity that we can give you on the one in this sector as well.
So as a final question, Minister, do you think that you will be able to move faster in terms of the enforcement action that you're sort of discussing in building supplies that you have done in the supermarket industry?
As Anna said, we've made very good progress. We're making very good progress on the particular covenant that we're investigating in the building supplies sector, and we hope to have news on that reasonably soon. This is a matter of great concern to us. It's not. It is a matter for. We can see the economy-wide and sectoral impacts of these covenants. So it is a matter of priority and urgency for us to dig into that and try and resolve them as best we can.
Why are they allowed in the first place?
It's a contractual arrangement I mean, in some cases, a covenant can be put there for example, a relatively benign example would be somebody builds a subdivision and they want all of the houses to have similar colour schemes or designs or something in order to maximise what they see as the value of the property to everybody. So that would be an example of a covenant that would place some restrictions on people but may not seriously affect competition.
Don't cut down native trees on the property, protection of view lines, those kinds of things. So they're a long-standing land instrument, and we've identified this in the study and been cognisant of the fact that competition is one factor to be considered here, but it sits within a framework that applies much more broadly to land and ownership rights as well, which is why we recommend a broader look at how these things are used.
And I think it's a tribute to the Market Studies program that we've uncovered this stuff. Whilst we would all prefer to be able to solve these things really, really much more quickly, they have at least been uncovered. People are now removing them themselves, so we are making progress.
So it's essentially, as Anna was saying before, one of the functions of the Commerce Commission is to provide a shining light, and sunlight being the best disinfectant, all that sort of stuff. So essentially, is your message to any sector out there that are engaging in these compliance or these covenants issues that you guys might look at a little obtusely, is to watch your back, the ComCom's coming? Yeah,
have a preemptive look at it. Absolutely, yeah.
Can you? So you had that blue triangle there, and said it was challenging for new products to get through. What proportion of new products manage to get through?
New products can get through without going through the red rhombus. It's just costly, time-consuming, and difficult. They have to, for example, go and get a code, go and get a product certification. There's one product certification scheme that's run in New Zealand, and several providers for it. It costs thousands of dollars to get those. That's just the testing. That's just the fees. And then you have to pay annual fees to make sure that they continue to be certified. And then you've got a certified product, but you need to use it in a building. And the way the building's code is arranged, it doesn't regulate building products, it regulates building work. And so it matters how you use that product. So when you take that certified product put it in a plan and ask the Building Consent Authority to give it a compliance tick, those people have to say, yes, okay, you've got a certificate, but are you using it in the right way? And then naturally, it's...
So how many products are getting knocked back each year that should be getting through?
Well, I don't have that information, sorry. And I think it's probably more of a case of firms looking at this and saying, is it worth the hassle, or should I just go and sell my product somewhere else? So in other words, I think that even if we had that information, it would probably understate the scale of the problem.
Can we have some examples of where you found or learnt that Māori were disadvantaged in this area, given the significance of that recommendation?
Yes, I can talk to that. Yeah, I mean, for example, one of the things we heard in our hui with Māori was that relationships are very important, and that they like to build relationships verbally. Now, relationships, of course, are important to everybody. Building consent authorities and builders, or certainly builders, like to cultivate relationships with building consent authorities. What Māori have told us is that they like to do that verbally, and to talk to them and build those relationships. So that's an area that is rather than forms and so on. Yeah. So that's one area. Another is building scale. So Māori businesses quoting on very large jobs tend often not to have the experience that would make it possible for them to win those jobs. So partnering arrangements that would allow them to take a small slice of somebody else's big contract would allow them experience on big jobs, and therefore build their own leadership in the sector.
I think also what we've identified through discussions is that the consent system may not be flexible enough to accommodate some of the more bespoke building needs that Māori express to us. And one example of that is papakainga, so and building on communally owned Māori land, because the system is really structured around building a house on one owned piece of land or leased piece of land. And so what we've said is that we think there's a greater role for the system to look at some of these unique needs of Māori, but also importantly to involve Māori in that process of identifying what the issues are and how the solutions might be found, and providing a greater degree of opportunity for leadership, both in those processes and in the sector itself, to help to ensure that those needs are better met.
How should these recommendations really change the market? Will we see a lot of new products out there soon?
Look, what we've found is a lot of barriers, basically, and so reducing those barriers, making it easier, has got to be better, and we think it's important that happens, particularly in a world where with climate change there's going to need to be innovation in building materials. So
shake up Fletcher's dominance of the market.
I mean, that's part of it, right? Part of it is that you've got established products, and it's too hard for people to compete with those established products. So, if those barriers are lessened and removed, then that should be an outcome. Would be that established suppliers feel more competitive pressure. Got a question over here.
Many of the issues that you raise are systemic issues, and given that local building authorities are difficult, slow, like an aircraft carrier to turn around, does the government need to do root and branch reform here to force change?
Good question.
Well, it actually is.
Yeah, it is.
So the government has a building reform program underway, and it pains to say in its discussion papers that it is taking an all-of-system approach to that reform program, and we describe it in some detail in the report, but it takes 3 phases, and currently the consent review program is underway, and there's a discussion paper and also a risk and liability paper published just before our draft report, actually. And so that's where the greatest overlap may well be between the work that we've done in this market study and the work that government is already doing to look at the consenting system. But that is one of 3 phases of the reform program that will also look at consumer rights as well, and the way that consumer interests are served, and also occupational sort of licensing, registration type requirements and things of that nature. So bringing all of those things together, we see, and government reflects this in the discussion paper, and a whole of system approach means that you also can remove across the system some of these impediments to address some of the issues they identify, but also we think to address and remove some of the impediments to competition that we've identified as well. And what we hope is that some of the recommendations that we've made, particularly relating to the consent review, consent system, will be able to be fed into that consent review and contribute to the outcomes there as well for them.
Leaving aside the specific instance of Winston wallboards, did you find any issues there in your study and in the hearings of excessive profits or margins being made by key players in sectors of the industry, to the extent that they were concerning, adding to the cost of housing?
We didn't attempt to measure profitability in the sector, and the reason for that is that this study, unlike previous ones, has just got so many firms supplying it. There's a very, very large number of them. And secondly, we were looking for systemic issues that were common to all building products and all sort of trading methods. So, if we'd had another year, we might have been able to quantify that issue and quantify your issue about how many products are, not getting through the system. What's the size of the prize here? We just did not have the scope to do that.
Would you have been more rounded in the report if you'd included plumbing and electrical?
Possibly. That was a scoping decision that was taken reasonably early, but remember that we've already got about 18 product categories and many, many, many more products within those categories. So there is a limit to what can be done. It would have been perhaps interesting to see whether or not some of these systemic issues are there for plumbing and electrical. Again, it's a scope question, and there's only so much you can do in a year.
And finally, if I could ask, I wouldn't expect you to be able to quantify this, but how do you see your recommendations, if adopted, lowering the cost of building a house, given that one of the major parts of it, of course, is the price of the land to begin with, and labour, 2 key elements of the cost structure. Yes. Over which you've been able to cast no scrutiny.
But this is normal in a building in a market study, right? I mean, there are a lot of other things that are going on that determine prices apart from competition. Competition between the suppliers is one of them, and it's an important one. But there are a lot of other factors going on. So, for example, take an obvious example in the case of fuel. A war in Europe is not something that we, it doesn't mean that it's not valuable to try and promote competition in the sector just because you're not solving every issue.
But would you expect these recommendations to be able to lower prices of building products?
Yes, I would.
Well, because what we've said before in relation to each of these market studies and what we say in relation to competition generally and all of the underpinnings of the Commerce Act is that what we know is that when competition works as it should, it delivers the right kinds of quality of products at the right kinds of price for consumers, and we would expect that to ultimately impact the price of building. And also, importantly in this market study, the efficiency of the process associated with building a house. So if you've got more products able to enter and expand into the market, and you've got a smoother ride through the consenting and variation process and the substitution of those competing products, then we would expect that to impact the overall cost of the building process itself. That's what competition does.
How many more new products are you expecting on the market as a result of these?
Well, it's really about competition delivering this dynamic, and then the market allows these products in, and competition will allow the best and the best value to rise to the top. So we're concerned with focusing on making sure that the process of competition is working well to allow these products to enter and expand in the market. So we're not about picking winners and losers in the type of product or estimating the number of products that there might be.
No, and it may also be, that there's products that are there already but have got a tiny toehold and can't expand for the reasons that we've been talking about. So, that's entirely likely as an outcome of our recommendations, is that you can get those products more easily able to be selected with lower risk and more confidence by designers, builders, and so on, and that's going to promote competition. It's that nexus, that reinforcing cycle that needs to be broken, and if, to the extent we can do that, that'll create opportunities for products that are already in the market to expand and for new ones to come in.
We might just look for a couple more questions, because I know that many of you want to speak to John afterward. So.
Just to clarify, have there been 3 investigations into Winston Wallboards? As they say, they're surprised that there's a 3rd investigation.
I have been involved in the one that I mentioned, and obviously in this decision to open this one, we'd have to look. I'd be interested in the information that they have. It must go back quite some time if that's the case. So I can't answer you equivocally, but I think 2 plus this. Right, so that's 3 in total, including. Yeah, but this one that we're opening, yeah. Okay, so it sounds like that's right, but let's come back to you and confirm.
Right, last one over here, Tom.
Just a general question. I mean, do you feel you've really got to the bottom of why new housing is so much more expensive to build in New Zealand than overseas, or is that a bigger job?
Well, I think that's similar to the discussion we were having earlier, that this wasn't really an investigation into the price of housing. This is really about competition for building products. So land is such an obvious factor in the price of building housing, and local government infrastructure is obviously such a huge factor, labour costs and so on. So, but to the extent that what we've got to the bottom of, I think, is the way that competition works and the barriers that there are to it, and a lot of it's tied up with that consenting process, the need to get consent, the desire to make it easy to get consent. That's a huge part of the story. All right.
Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.